I was living that typical stressful life, having the family that I loved and adored, and the home on the mountain, but then commuting to the office and working in human resources, and it was very stressful. And I was trying to do too much, not being able to fully receive because of worthiness issues and being a woman and all those different things, you name it. And so I'm living that typical life, and I make that statement. There has to be something more than this. And when you make that type of statement, you're going to have to be a little prepared for the possibility that there's going to be a response. And I received a response, and it was really loud and clear. And it was as I was pursuing a little more into my what I call glimpses of spiritual enlightenment. Those times in your life when something happens and suddenly you have this knowingness that you're not alone and that you are supported and there's a bigger picture. And yet we tend to put those under the rug pretty soon because life gets in the way, and we get our attention back onto our work and our bills and our romance or whatever, our children, everything that calls our attention, those things that are distractions. Because quite honestly, if we don't start caring for ourselves first, which is counterintuitive to what we've been programmed or taught to believe, we won't have anything to give. And it was that I was depleted. I had given everything I had, everything, to my family and to my husband, and building out his new tattoo studio and my work and everything. And I was gone. I was done. I was empty. I had nothing else to share anymore. And that's when you make that statement. There has to be something more than this. And so, short time after that, I find myself driving on a mountain highway, and I had my 2 daughters in the car with me, and we're being forced into a rollover accident. And I saw it happening. I tend to be in that control freak mode of knowing what everyone else is doing, because I want to force them to do what I'm doing. I knew what was happening, and I saw it happening, and I felt helpless because I didn't feel like I could stop it from happening. And I can remember looking out my window to the left as this car is merging and coming over into our lane, and there was a concrete wall. It was the overpass for the highway, and I knew that concrete wall would be ending. And so I made the decision at that point to go ahead and get onto the shoulder and get into the median, a grassy median, and at a high rate of speed, as it's the highway. And I knew then at that moment that I was losing control of my vehicle. And I made the decision. I knew what was back on the highway that I had just exited. I knew the car that forced me off and the one that it was passing. And so I made the decision to get back up on the highway. And because I didn't know what was coming around that big hillside and that curve on the road. And so I end up back on the highway, losing control, go across the passenger side, end up over all 4 wheels. We are on all 4 wheels. And I had a mantra during that time, and it was, help us get through this, help us get through this, help us get through this. And I stated, if something happens to one of my daughters, I'm not staying. I am not staying, because I don't want to go through that. I can't even imagine. And so here we are on all 4 wheels, and I get out of the car and make sure my daughter Brandolyn and Tabitha, they're fine. Brandolyn's getting Tabitha out of the car seat. And I'm standing there on the highway, and I look up, and I'm seeing the bluest sky I'd ever seen in my life, and smelling the freshest air I'd ever smelled in my life. And right then and there, life as I had known it was different. It was never going to be the same. And this tall, big trucker guy that came around that other side that I didn't know was driving there stopped and had pulled over to let me know that he had called for help, and they were on their way. And I looked at him, and I can remember saying, my angels saved us. And he looked at me like I was insane. And in that moment I felt there was no insanity. There was no insanity. There was absolute knowingness that we were divinely protected. And I can't explain it, but we were. And so, although physically unharmed, there was a lot of emotion that came up with us, and a lot of fear, because I was living a lot of fear in life, and all of a sudden I was afraid to drive for a while, and it took a few days of really, aligning to it, and even having to be followed by my husband when I was ready for the first time. It was just crazy, how afraid I was. And working through that, and ended up 2 weeks after the accident, I went to a metaphysical fair, and there was a woman, Tina Michelle, who was in the area at the time to do a presentation on communicating with your angels, and that really spoke to me. It felt appropriate for what we had just experienced. And so I go to the metaphysical fair with a girlfriend and Tabitha, and she's like not even 3.5 yet, and go in there with the knowingness, the intention. I asked to be guided to the most appropriate person to do a reading for me, as I knew I was alive, but I didn't know why. I didn't know why I was here, and so I go through this maze of people, and I end up at this booth in the back of the room, and I notice these picture in the picture frame, and it's like little bowling pins, different color bowling pins around a central figure, which is basically you, represents you, and then in the energy of the angels that are surrounding you. And I'm like, oh, I want that reading because I want a picture of my angels. I mean, that would, it just saved my ass. So, gosh, I need this. And this was the woman that I was there to hear speak. She was the one that was doing the lecture on communicating with your angels. So it seemed pretty coincidental. And I go for her presentation, and she talks about her near-death experiences. She had 3 of them throughout her lifetime. And each time her gift of tuning in is like, radio frequencies out there in the universe. And if you don't believe that's possible, buy a radio. But anyway, you have these frequencies out there, and you tune into one person, and you align to their station, and you connect to their angels. And so then she was able to bring this gift forward and share information with people, information from their angels. And so that's a pretty cool thing, I thought. And I can remember being really concerned with Tabitha being as young as she was and trying to keep her quiet, because I was that type A control freak, and that's what I did. And so I was, kind of half listening to everything she was saying. And it didn't really resonate or ring to me when she said, there's somebody in this room that's here to see me that, has a similar experience. And I'm just like, la la la, Tabby, be quiet, So anyway, I go for my reading right after her presentation. And she's pretty legit. She immediately connected with my angels and told me about my rollover accident. And I'm like, okay, yes. And she goes, well, when you left. And I said, what do you mean I left? She says, well, you made this quick trip. And I said, I had no idea what you're talking about. She says, you don't remember? And I said, no. Oh, well, when you were upside down and your head hit the roof and came slamming down on your shoulder, boom, you were gone. And it was a real quick trip. But basically, you've been given 16 things that you're supposed to do before you go back. And I sat there and listened to what she was telling me, and then all of a sudden got a little upset with the fact that here I'm already pretty stressed. I have a huge to-do list because, remember, I'm the control freak, not letting people help me, not really willing to receive help. And I'm getting a to-do list from God. I mean, really, because I couldn't believe it, honestly. Okay. And so all I could do is sit there and listen to her. And I also felt a little gypped at the fact that I didn't remember the little quick trip. I didn't get the white light in the tunnel and all that stuff, because I was so busy holding that car together and clenching that steering wheel and determined I was going to save my children. Okay. So anyway, during the course of this conversation and my list, and I was only given 8 things that day and told the others would come when I was ready. And she's having this conversation all of a sudden telling me that I needed to have a reconnection. And I have never heard of the reconnection. She says, Dr. Eric Pearl, write his name down, and I jotted it down on the envelope. And she says, you need to have your reconnection. You're in limbo. You don't know where you belong. And this work will help you. And it's $333. Doesn't matter if you're penniless or a millionaire, that's the cost. And I'm like, okay. And something inside me went, wow, that sounds exciting. This would be cool, and I want this. And so